In a hall full of laughter and gold, a whip rose into the air. Below it, a girl in blood-stained rags threw her arms over her head and braced for a pain she had felt 1,000 mornings before. No one moved to stop it. No one ever had. That was simply how this place worked. The powerful feasted. The forgotten bled. And the most precious thing in a dying world was kept in chains beneath the floor, opened at dawn like a vein, and sold by the drop. She had stopped expecting rescue a long time ago, but this time, the blow never landed. This time, something at the head of the table had caught a scent on the wind and gone utterly still, and in the breath before everything shattered, the whole rotten kingdom held its breath with him. There is a story the old wolves tell when the fires burn low. A story about a girl whose scars kept an entire kingdom breathing. Most never believed it, but it was true, in the way that the cruelest things are always true. Far in the cold reaches of the world, where the pines grew black and the snow never fully melted, there was a sickness moving through the packs. They called it the silver rot. It crept into the blood. It turned a wolf against its own body, unraveling the healing that should have saved it. Whole territories went silent. Whole bloodlines simply ended. And yet, in the middle of all that dying, one pack thrived. The Ironwood pack. They feasted while others starved. They wore fine furs while others wrapped their dead. And they sold the only thing that mattered in a dying world. A cure. A small vial of shimmering liquid that could push the rot back from the edge. Alpha Cassius Thorn claimed his healers had found it in the deep woods, brewed from rare herbs only he could harvest. It was a lie. There were no herbs. There was only a girl in the dark. Her name was Wren Hallowell. She was 20 years old, and she had not seen the sun in longer than she could measure. Down beneath the great stone halls, past the warmth and the laughter, there was a cell with no window. The straw on the floor had long gone to rot. The cold came up through the stone and settled into the bone and never left. And there, curled small against the wall, Wren listened to the world above her live. She was not a criminal. She was not a rogue. She was the last of an old healing line, a bloodline so rare it had become a bedtime story, and her blood carried something no sickness could touch. That was her crime, being born with the one thing everyone wanted. Every morning, before the light, the heavy door would groan open, and the ritual would begin. They called it punishment. They dressed it up in those words so no one would have to feel the shame of what it truly was. Because Thorn had learned something terrible early on. The blood of her line gave up its deepest power only when the body was pushed to the edge of breaking, when the heart raced, when the fear was real. So they made her bleed in a way that looked like discipline. 30 lashes. Every single dawn. Wren had learned not to scream. Screaming only made them slower. So she pressed her lips together until they split, and she let the pain move through her like weather, and she counted, not the strikes. She counted the faces of the people in the valley below, because that was the thing they held over her. The humans in the valley could not defend themselves, and Thorn had promised in that soft and reasonable voice that frightened her more than any shout, that if she ever stopped, if she ever gave up, he would let his wolves loose on every last one of them. So she stayed. She bled. She survived. Not for herself. For strangers who would never know her name. And here is the thing the story always leaves out. Wren was not only enduring, she was watching, even drugged, even weak, even half-blind with pain. She had spent those long years listening through the stone. She knew which guard drank too much. She knew when the convoys left and when they returned. She knew the shape of the tunnels by the echo of dripping water. She had built a map in the dark in her mind, brick by brick, because somewhere deep inside her, something refused to lie down and die. She did not know what she was saving it for. She only knew she was not finished. Far to the north, the ground began to tremble. Soren Viel rode at the front of 200 wolves, and the snow fell around him like ash. He was a large man, broad and hard, with eyes the cold pale color of ice over deep water. They had a name for him in the whispered corners of the world: the Winter Reaver. He had taken the savage north through sheer will and bloodshed, and men looked away when he passed. But under the armor, under the legend, there was a wound. His sister, Maren. She was the only soft thing left in his life, and the silver rot had her now. He could see it climbing the side of her neck in those dark veins. He could hear it in the rattle of her breathing at night. The ironwood cure was the only thing slowing it, and so he had come to buy more and to demand the recipe, or to burn the place to its foundations if they refused him. He had not come for anything else. He had stopped expecting anything else from the world a long time ago. His wolf had been restless since they crossed into Ironwood land, pacing inside him, pulling at something he could not name. He told himself it was the scent of so many strangers. He was wrong. The great hall of Ironwood was warm and golden and reeked of roasted meat and old wine. Thorn bowed too low. His daughter Vivian, draped in jewels, watched Soren the way a cat watches a bird, certain she would be chosen, certain her beauty was a kind of power. Soren did not look at her. He looked at the food he could not eat, and listened to laughter that meant nothing to him, and somewhere in the back of his mind, his wolf paced and would not settle. Then the kitchen doors opened, and the wind moved through the hall. It came slow. It came soft. It carried the smell of the cold from below, and the smoke of the torches, and under all of it, something else. Rain on warm earth, wild pine, something sweet and aching that he had no name for. Soren went still. His hand stopped halfway to the cup. Across the long room, a girl came through the doors, hunched under the weight of a heavy pitcher. She wore rags. Her feet were bare on the cold stone. Her dark hair hung like a curtain over a face he could not see, and there was dried blood soaked through the back of her thin dress. She was the most broken thing in that bright room, and his entire body had turned toward her like a compass, finding north. Mate. The word did not come from his mind. It came from somewhere older. It slammed through him so hard that the edges of his vision went white, and his wolf, that great cold ancient thing, threw itself against the inside of his skull and howled. But that was not all he smelled. Under the rain and the pine, there was the harsh bite of wolfsbane, poison, heavy in her veins, and under that, he smelled the cure. The same metallic shimmer he had spooned past his sister's lips, night after night. The liquid he had paid in gold and submission to keep her breathing. It was not coming from any plant. It was rising from the fresh blood beneath the rags on that girl's back. The room kept laughing. The fire kept crackling. Thorn kept smiling his oily smile. And Soren Vale sat frozen, the whole rotten truth opening in front of him like a wound. There was no miracle herb. There never had been. There was only her. Ren felt the change before she understood it. A weight settled on her, heavy and warm, like a hand pressed flat between her shoulder blades. Her skin prickled. Her ruined wolf, buried so deep under the poison she had almost forgotten it lived, stirred for the first time in years. She did not lift her head. She had learned never to lift her head. But her heart was pounding for a reason it did not have words for. She gripped the pitcher tighter and forced one bleeding foot in front of the other, dragging herself toward the high table, toward the strangers, toward whatever new cruelty this night had decided to bring her. She did not know that the man at the head of the table had already stopped breathing. She did not know that everything was about to change. She only knew the cold of the stone, and the weight of the pitcher, and the small, fierce voice inside her that had kept her alive through every dawn. Not finished. Not yet. And somewhere above her, in the golden light, a king with eyes like winter was watching her come closer. And for the first time in a long and brutal life, he was afraid. The closer Ren came to the high table, the louder the silence inside her grew. Every face up there was a stranger. Every face was a danger. She had learned that long ago. Strangers meant new hands, new rules, new ways to be used. So she kept her eyes down. She watched the floor, the wine stains, the polished boots of men who had never once gone hungry. The pitcher was heavy in her arms. Her wrists shook. The wounds on her back had opened again somewhere on the stairs, and she could feel the warmth of fresh blood sliding down her spine, soaking into the rags. "Do not fall," she told herself. "Pour the wine. Stay small. Disappear." She had become very good at disappearing. But Vivienne Thorne had other plans. The Alpha's daughter sat near the head of the table, wrapped in silk and jewels, glittering like something poisonous and beautiful. She had wanted the Northern King to notice her all evening. She had worn her finest things. She had laughed at the right moments. And he had not looked at her even once. That kind of insult curdles in a certain kind of heart. So when the broken little Omega shuffled past, Vivienne saw her chance to feel powerful again. She smiled, and she slid her foot out into the path. Ren saw it too late. Her bare toes caught. Her balance was already gone, her body already too weak, and there was nothing she could do. The pitcher left her hands. Time stretched the way it does in the worst moments. She saw the heavy iron vessel turn slowly in the air. She saw the dark wine arc out like a ribbon. She heard it before she understood it. The crash, the splash, the gasp. Red wine bloomed across the floor, and across the hem of Vivienne's beautiful gown. The hall went silent. Then Vivienne was on her feet, shrieking, her lovely face twisting into something ugly. "You clumsy, worthless thing." The words cracked across the room like the whip Ren knew so well. And Cassius Thorne stood up. Ren felt the fear before she saw the leather. It was an old fear, a trained fear. Her body knew that sound, the soft creak of him rising, the shift of his weight, the way the room always went quiet around him. She saw him reach for his belt. She saw the riding crop come free. And in that moment, in front of the Northern King and all his wolves, Cassius Thorne forgot to be careful. He forgot that his guest was watching. He forgot that this girl was his secret, the source of all his wealth, the thing he had hidden in the dark for years. All he saw was an Omega who had embarrassed him. He raised the crop high above his head. "I will take the skin from your bones," he snarled. Ren did not run. There was nowhere to run. There never had been. She threw her thin arms up over her head. She squeezed her eyes shut. She braced for the bite of leather she had felt 1,000 times before, the tearing, the fire, the warm rush of her own blood. She made herself small. She waited for the pain. It did not come. Something else came instead. A sound tore through the hall. Not a man's voice. Something deeper. Something older. A snarl that came up from the floor and into the chest. A sound that made the torches flicker and the jewels tremble on Vivienne's throat. And then the world moved. Soren Weil had not decided to move. His body had decided for him. One moment he was seated, frozen, the truth of her still unfolding in his mind. The next, the great oak table was splintering under his hands as he came over it, and the cold legend of the North was nothing but fury wearing the shape of a man. He had spent his whole life in control, cold, measured, patient as ice. That control was gone. His wolf had taken the wheel, and his wolf had seen one thing only. A hand raced to strike his mate. He crossed the hall faster than the eye could follow. He caught the falling crop in his bare hand. Thorne's arm jerked to a stop. The alpha's eyes went wide. He pulled. The leather did not move. It was as if it had been set in stone. Soren turned his head slowly to look at the man whose wrist he now held, and his eyes were no longer the pale ice blue of a man. They burned, bright, gold. The eyes of a dominant alpha whose mate had been threatened in front of him. "Touch her," Soren said. His voice was very soft. That was the terrifying part. It was soft and low, and it carried into every corner of that frozen hall. "And nothing on this earth will be enough to hide what is left of you." Ren had not moved. Her arms were still up over her head. Her eyes were still shut. Her whole body was still locked in the bracing, waiting for an agony that had simply stopped. Slowly, she lowered her arms. Slowly, she opened her eyes, and she saw a mountain of a man standing over her like a wall between her and the world. She did not understand it. In all her years in that place, no one had ever stood between her and the whip. No one had ever caught the blow. The whole shape of her life had taught her one lesson over and over, that no one was coming. And yet, here he was, a stranger, a king, with gold fire in his eyes and her abuser's wrist crushed in his fist. She should have felt relief. What she felt was suspicion, because she had learned that men who saved you always wanted something. The kindness was always the bait. The hand that lifted you up was always the hand that owned you next. So even now, even shaking, even bleeding, Ren watched him, and she did not let herself hope. Thorne tried to find his footing. He was a clever man, and clever men do not stay frightened for long. "Your Grace," he said, forcing a smile through the pain, "this is a household matter. A servant. Nothing to trouble a king. Soren did not let go. He was looking down now, not at Thorn, at her, at the girl on the floor in the bloody rags, at the fresh red soaking through the cloth on her back, and the smell of it filled his head, that impossible mix of his dying sister's medicine and the rain and pine scent of the only person in the world made for him. Something in his chest cracked open. A servant, he repeated quietly. He let go of Thorn's wrist. The Alpha stumbled back, cradling his arm, and Soren knelt. The whole hall watched the Winter Reaver, the man who had burned territories to ash, lower himself to the cold stone floor beside a trembling girl in rags. His commander stiffened. The ironwood guards along the walls put their hands to their swords. Vivian's mouth hung open. Soren saw none of it. He reached out, slow, the way a person reaches toward a wounded animal. Ren flinched and pulled back, curling tighter, her breath coming fast and shallow. He stopped. He did not force it. He let his hand hang in the air between them, and the first words she gave him were not for herself. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was cracked from disuse, barely a rasp, but it was steady. "The villagers, down in the valley. He will kill them all if I stop, if I do not give him what he wants." She swallowed hard. Her dark eyes found his face, searching it, weighing it, still not trusting. "I will go back to the cell," she said. "I will give you the blood, whatever you came here for. Just, please do not let them hurt the valley." The room had gone very still. Soren felt the words land in his chest like stones. She was on her knees, broken, bleeding, drugged half out of her mind. And the first thing she did with her ruined voice was bargain for the lives of people who could never repay her. She thought he was just another buyer. She thought her own suffering was simply the price of the cure, a price she had already agreed to pay so that others could live. And in that moment, Soren Viel understood exactly what he had been doing. He had been spooning her blood between his sister's lips. He had paid gold for her pain. He had thanked the man who held the whip. The cure that was keeping Marin alive was the torture of his own mate. The horror of it nearly took him to the floor. Ren watched the something move across his face. She did not know what it was. Grief, maybe, or guilt. She had seen many things on the faces of powerful men, but never that. It made her even more afraid. Soren let his hand close the last inch of space. He laid his palm gently against the side of her face. And the world changed. The moment his skin touched hers, something passed between them. A spark, a current, a flood of warmth that poured up her cheek and down her throat and into her chest, lighting up places inside her that the poison had kept dark for years. Ren gasped. It was not pain. It was the opposite of pain. It was the strangest, most frightening thing. A sudden, impossible feeling of safety, blooming in a body that had forgotten the word. Deep inside her, buried under all that wolfsbane, her wolf lifted its head, just for a heartbeat, and it knew him. Ren did not understand what was happening. She only knew that his hand was warm, and her skin was singing where he touched it. And for one terrible second, she wanted to lean into that warmth more than she had wanted anything in her whole life. That terrified her more than the whip ever had. Because wanting was dangerous. Wanting was how they got you. She pulled her face out of his hand. The warmth broke. The current snapped. and Soren felt the loss of it like a door slamming shut, like the cold rushing back into a room. He did not chase it. He stayed exactly where he was, kneeling, his empty hand resting on his own knee, and he looked at her the way a man looks at the one thing he cannot afford to lose. "No one is going back to any cell," he said. His voice had changed. The fury was banked now, controlled, but underneath it was something far more dangerous. A vow. And no one is ever going to touch you again. Ren did not believe him. How could she? She had heard promises before. They were just words men used to move you where they wanted you. She had survived this long by believing in nothing but the floor beneath her and the breath in her own lungs. But there was something in his eyes she had never seen aimed at her before. Not hunger, not ownership. Something that looked almost like reverence. She filed it away. She did not trust it, but she noticed it. She had spent years noticing things, storing them, building her map of the world in the dark. And she added this to the map now. This strange, kneeling king with gold in his eyes and grief in his voice. Useful, perhaps, or dangerous. Time would tell. She was not going to hand him her hope just because he had caught one whip. Above them, Thorn was recovering his courage. "She belongs to Ironwood," the Alpha said, his voice rising. "Whatever she has told you, Your Grace, she is a liar and a freak. Her line was full of traitors. I took her in. I kept her fed. The cure that keeps your sister breathing comes from my generosity. Without me, the girl, the blood, all of it ends." Soren rose to his feet. He did so slowly, and the temperature in the hall seemed to fall with him. Frost began to creep along the edges of the spilled wine. His presence expanded, a crushing weight of pure dominance that pressed down on every wolf in the room until knees buckled along the walls. He turned those golden eyes on Cassius Thorn. "You sold the world a miracle in a glass bottle," Soren said. His gaze dropped to the blood on the floor, to the girl who flinched at every loud sound, to the silver scars he could just see through the torn cloth at her shoulder. "But there was never a herb," he said. "There was only her." A murmur ran through his wolves. The old name passed from mouth to mouth like a prayer half remembered. The White Healing Line. A bedtime story. A myth. And here she was, kneeling in rags on a cold stone floor. Ren felt every eye in the room turn to her. For years she had survived by being invisible, by being no one, by being a thing in the dark that the world did not have to look at. Now she was seen, by 200 strangers, by a king, by her own captor, whose secret had just shattered in front of everyone who mattered. It should have felt like rescue. It felt like being pulled out of one kind of danger straight into another. She lifted her chin anyway, slowly, painfully, with the last strength in her poisoned body, because if she was going to be seen, she would not be seen on her knees. Soren saw her rise, and something in his cold heart, something that had been frozen for a very long time, began, very quietly, to thaw. The carriage that carried Ren away from Ironwood was warmer than anything she could remember. She did not trust the warmth. She sat pressed into the far corner, as far from the king as the small space would allow, her knees drawn up, her arms wrapped around them. Every part of her ached. The motion of the wheels rocked her wounds open and closed, and she clenched her teeth and made no sound. Soren sat across from her, He filled the whole other side, broad and still, his pale eyes never quite leaving her face. He had ordered his healers away. He had told them not to touch her until they were behind his own walls, surrounded by his own people. He did not say why. The why was simple. He did not trust anyone else near her yet. Wren did not know that. She only knew that the most dangerous wolf she had ever seen was watching her in the dark, and she had spent her whole life learning what came after a man looked at you like that. So she waited for the price. It did not come. He did not reach for her. He did not speak. He simply pulled the heavy fur from his own shoulders, leaned forward slow enough for her to see every movement, and laid it on the seat beside her. "For the cold," he said. Then he sat back and looked out at the snow. Wren stared at the fur. She did not take it for a long time. When she finally did, she did it quickly, the way a starving thing snatches food, expecting the hand to slap her away. No hand came. She pulled the warmth around her shoulders, careful of her back, and she breathed in the scent of it. Pine, cold air, something underneath that was just him. Her wolf stirred again, faint and far away under the poison. She pushed it down. She was not ready to feel anything. The northern keep rose out of the mountains like something carved by the moon herself. Wren had imagined many cruel places in her years in the dark. She had not imagined this. Stone the color of pale ash, towers wrapped in mist, snow falling soft and endless over a fortress that breathed warmth from 100 fires. They carried her inside. And the strangest thing happened. No one chained her. No one dragged her by the hair. No one shoved a bowl of poisoned gruel into her hands. They laid her on a bed so soft she almost wept from the wrongness of it, and women with gentle voices came to tend her, and not one of them looked at her with contempt. The northern healers worked through the night. They could not heal her with their hands alone. The wolfsbane in her blood was too deep, too thick, the work of years of careful poisoning. So they did the slow work instead. They brewed bitter purges that made her body shake and sweat. They drew the poison out the way you draw venom from a wound, a little at a time, hour after hour. It was agony of a different kind. But it was the agony of healing, not the agony of harm. And somewhere in the worst of it, half-conscious, soaked in fever sweat, Wren felt a presence at the edge of the room that never left. A large shadow by the door, watching, waiting, not coming closer, just there. She did not have the strength to wonder why a king would stand sentry over a broken Omega through the long hours of the night. She only knew that when she surfaced from the worst of the fever dreams, the shadow was always still there, and against every instinct she had, that began to matter. Soren did not sleep. He stood at the door of that room and he watched her fight, and he hated himself with a thoroughness he had never felt before. His mind kept going back to his sister's bedside, to all the nights he had lifted Marin's head and pressed the shimmering cure to her lips, and whispered that everything would be all right. He had felt like a good brother in those moments. He had felt like he was saving her, and every drop of that medicine had come from the body of the woman now shaking with fever a few steps away. He had not known. That was the truth, and it changed nothing. He had not known, and still he had done it. Still he had paid the gold. Still he had thanked the man who held the whip and called him a friend of the North. How many vials had he bought? How many dawns had she bled so that his sister could breathe? The math of it was a wound he would carry for the rest of his life. His wolf paced inside him, frantic, desperate to go to her, to lie down at the foot of her bed and guard her with its body. He held it back, because the one thing she had asked of the world, the only thing, was not to be used. And his nearness, his need, his bond, all of it was a kind of pressure she had not agreed to. So he stayed by the door. He gave her the only gift he knew how to give, a person who had been owned her whole life, distance, and the choice of when to close it. It took 3 days for Wren to surface fully. When she did, the first thing she noticed was the silence in her own body. The constant grinding pain in her back had dulled to a deep ache. The fog of the poison had thinned. For the first time in longer than she could remember, her own thoughts came clear and sharp, not muffled under the wolfsbane. She lay very still and took inventory the way she always did. The room, the light, the exits. There was a window. Real light came through it, gray and soft, falling on snow-covered peaks that went on forever. There was a fire. There was a chair by the bed. And in the chair, asleep at last, sat the king. He looked younger asleep. The hard lines of his face had softened. There was a roughness on his jaw, the look of a man who had not rested in days, and his great hands lay open and loose on the arms of the chair. Wren studied him for a long time. She had been studying men her whole life, reading the set of their shoulders for cruelty, reading their hands for what those hands would do. It was how she had survived. And what she read in him now confused her. He had had 3 days. 3 days while she lay helpless and fevered, unable to fight, unable to run. 3 days in which a man like Thorn would have taken everything he wanted and called it his right. This king had taken nothing. He had sat in a chair by the door, and he had waited. Wren did not have a word for what that meant. She had no experience to compare it to. So she filed it away, the way she filed everything, and she watched him sleep, and something behind her ribs that had been clenched tight for years loosened, just a little. When Soren woke, she was sitting up. He came alert all at once, the way warriors do, and for a moment their eyes met across the room. Neither of them spoke. Then Wren said the thing that had been pressing at her since she woke. "Your sister." Soren went very still. "She is dying," Wren said. It was not a question. She had smelled it on him in the great hall, under the cure, under everything. The rot. It is in her blood, and it is close to her heart. "Yes," he said quietly. Wren nodded slowly. "And the cure you have been buying," she said. "The one keeping her alive." She did not finish. She did not need to. The truth sat between them in the room, ugly and plain. Soren did not look away from her. "I did not know," he said. It was not an excuse. He did not offer it as one. He simply laid it down between them, the worst thing he had ever done, and let her do with it what she would. Wren considered him for a long moment. She had every right to hate him. He was the buyer. He was the reason the whip came down. Her pain had flowed straight into his hands, and his gold had flowed straight into Thorn's pocket. The whole machine of her suffering had needed men exactly like him to keep turning. She waited to feel the hate. It did not come the way she expected, because she had watched him these 3 days. She had read his hands and his shoulders and the chair by the door. And the man who had built that machine of cruelty would never have given a broken Omega the choice of when to be touched. "I believe you," she said at last. The word surprised them both. Soren closed his eyes for a moment, and something in his chest eased that he had not known was so tight. Then Ren did the thing that no one expected. She did not weep. She did not beg. She did not curl up and wait to be saved. She started to plan. "There is something you need to know," she said. Her voice was stronger now. The poison was leaving her, and with it, the fog that had blunted her for years. She sat up straighter, and for the first time, the king saw a flash of who she was underneath the wounds. Sharp, watchful, a mind that had been working in the dark all this time, building, remembering, waiting for the one moment it could be useful. Thorn did not just sell the cure, she said. He made the sickness. Soren went rigid. "What?" Ren told him. She told him in the flat, careful voice of someone who had memorized every word through a stone wall, terrified she would forget. She told him about the convoys that left Ironwood in the dead of night, about the wagons that did not carry cure outward, but carried something else, bundles, blankets, tainted goods, soaked in the blood of the sick, sent quietly into the territories that had not yet fallen. She told him how the rot would bloom in a new pack a few weeks after a friendly Ironwood trade caravan passed through, and how, soon after, a desperate alpha would send a rider begging Thorn for the cure, at double the price. Thorn was not saving the world from the rot, Ren said. He was spreading it, a little at a time, to the packs that still had wealth left to take. He made the disease, and he sold the cure, and he grew fat on both ends. She paused. And the only thing he needed was me. My blood. My pain. The one true thing in all of his lies. The room was silent except for the fire. Soren sat with the horror of it, the scale of it. Thousands dead. Whole bloodlines ended. Not by accident. Not by fate. By a man's greed. And his own gold had been part of it. His own desperate love for his sister had fed the machine. He looked at the woman on the bed, this person he had paid to torture without ever knowing her face, and he felt something fierce and terrible rise in him. "You remembered all of it," he said softly, "through the wall, through the poison, all this time." Ren met his eyes. "Someone had to," she said, and there it was, the thing that set her apart from every broken creature the world had tried to make of her. She had not survived by waiting to be rescued. She had survived by refusing to look away, by holding the truth in the dark, brick by brick, so that one day, if a day ever came, she would be ready to put it in someone's hands. This was that day. She had chosen him to give it to, not because she trusted him fully, she did not, but because he had given her a fur for the cold, and 3 days of distance, and the strange, unbearable gift of being believed. It was enough to begin. Far to the south, in the cold passes between territories, the news was already spreading. The white healer was real. She lived, and she was no longer behind Ironwood's walls. In a fortress of black stone, an alpha named Garen of the Black Pine Pack heard the whisper and went very still over his cup. The white line, the blood that cured anything. The thing every dying alpha on the continent had dreamed of owning. Thorn had hidden her well. Thorn had grown rich and soft and stupid on his secret, and now Thorn had lost her to the north. Garen smiled into his drink. A thing that valuable did not belong to whoever held it. It belonged to whoever was strong enough to take it. And the Winter Reaver, for all his terror, was far from home. His men spread thin, his sister dying, his attention fixed on a single broken girl. "Send word," Garen told his lieutenant, quietly, "to every pack that wants the cure and cannot pay the Northern King's price." He set down his cup. "Tell them the healer can be shared," he said, "if they help me take her." The hunt had begun. Back in the keep, Wren did not yet know her name had become a prize in the mouths of strangers, but she felt it, the way she always felt danger before it arrived. She had spent the afternoon walking, slowly, painfully, one hand on the wall. The healers had begged her to rest, but rest was a thing she did not know how to do, and her body needed to remember how to move under its own power. Soren found her at the window at the end of a long corridor, looking south. She did not turn when he approached. She had heard him coming. She always heard everything now. "There will be others," she said. Soren stopped beside her, careful to leave space between them. "Others," he repeated. "Other men," she said. "Like Thorn. Like you used to be, before you knew. The cure is worth a kingdom. And now everyone knows it has a face and a body and a heartbeat. Men will come for me. They always come for the valuable thing." She said it without fear. Just fact. The fact she had lived her whole life inside. Soren looked at her profile against the gray light, the sharp line of her jaw, the fierce stillness of her. "Let them come," he said. Wren finally turned and looked at him. "You do not understand," she said. "As long as I exist, I am a thing to be taken. A whip, a cage, a chest of gold. It does not matter who holds the leash. To the whole world, I am the leash." There was no self-pity in it. Only the clear, hard truth of a woman who had spent 20 years learning exactly how the world saw her. And Soren felt his heart break and harden in the same instant. "Then we change what the world sees," he said. Wren raised an eyebrow. It was the first, almost human expression she had given him. Skeptical, wry. A flicker of the person she might have been if the dark had never taken her. "How?" she said. "How do you change the whole world?" Soren held her gaze. "Not the whole world," he said. "Just the part of it that matters. We start with the truth you carried out of that place. The convoys, the blankets, the lie." He paused. "You spent years remembering it so it would not die in the dark," he said. "So let it out into the light. Let every pack he poisoned hear it from the one person who knows. Not as my prisoner, not as my cure, as yourself." Wren stared at him. For the first time in her life, someone was handing her back her own voice instead of taking it. She did not say yes. She was not ready to say yes to anything. But she turned back to the window and she looked south at the gathering storm. And somewhere deep under the fading poison, her white wolf opened its eyes and did not look away. The night the last of the poison left her body, Wren dreamed in color for the first time in years. She dreamed of running, not from anything, not toward anything, just running through deep snow under a white moon, her body strong and whole in hers, the wind full of pine and cold and freedom. She woke with tears on her face and did not know why. And then she felt it. The wolf. It rose up inside her like something surfacing from the bottom of a deep lake. slow, vast, ancient. For years it had been drowned under the wolfsbane, pinned, silenced, a candle held under water. Now the water was gone, and the flame caught. Wren gasped and sat up in the dark, her hands pressed to her own chest, feeling the strange new heat moving through her veins. Her skin began to glow, soft at first. A faint silver light under the surface, like moonlight caught in frost. It spread down her arms, across her collarbones, along the long lines of the scars on her back. And where it touched the scars, they began to change. The deep wounds from her last morning at Ironwood, the ones that had been ripped open again and again, knit themselves closed. The thick silver ridges of old scar tissue softened, not gone. They would never be fully gone, but quieter, calmer, like a storm finally moving out to sea. Wren watched her own body heal itself, and she did not know whether to laugh or weep. This was what they had stolen from her. This light, this strength, this wholeness. For years they had poisoned her precisely so she could never reach it, never use it, never be anything but a wound they could open at will. And now it was hers again. She slid out of the bed and crossed to the window on legs that did not shake. She did not lean on the wall. She did not stumble. For the first time in her remembered life, Wren Hallowell stood on her own 2 feet under her own power, and the moon came through the glass and lit the silver in her skin. And she breathed. Down the hall, Soren felt it before he understood it. The bond, the thread that had run between them since the moment the wind shifted in that golden hall, suddenly blazed. It had been there all along, faint and patient, dimmed by the poison in her blood. Now it flared to life, bright and clean and undeniable, and his wolf surged up so hard that he was on his feet before he knew he had moved. She was awake. She was whole, and every instinct in his body was screaming at him to go to her. He made it as far as the door. His hand was on the latch. His heart was pounding. The pull was almost unbearable, this deep, aching need to be near her, to see the thing he had felt come alive down the corridor. And then he stopped, because going to her now, in the middle of the night, drawn by a bond she had never asked for, that was not a choice he had the right to make for her. She had spent her whole life with men deciding when to enter her room. He would not be another one. So Soren Viel, the Winter Reaver, the terror of the North, stood with his hand on a latch in the dark and made himself let go. He went back to his chair. He sat down, and he waited again, the way he had been waiting for days, for her to decide what she wanted to give, if anything at all. Wren came to him near dawn. She found him in the great hall, alone, sitting before the dying fire with his elbows on his knees, looking older than his years. He heard her bare feet on the stone and turned, and the sight of her stole the breath from his chest. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a simple gown, and the silver still shimmered faintly under her skin, and her dark hair had gone glossy, and her face had filled out, and her eyes were clear and sharp and full of a fierce, terrible light. She was not the broken thing from the cell. She had never been. That had been a costume the world had forced on her. This was what had been underneath all along. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness. She was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful. "You did not come," Wren said. Soren did not pretend to misunderstand. "No," he said. "You felt it," she said. the way I did. The pull. I felt you on the other side of that door. I felt you turn around and walk away." "Yes," he said. She crossed the room slowly, watching his face the whole time, reading him the way she read everything. "Why?" she said. Soren was quiet for a moment. "Because you did not ask me to come," he said, "and I have spent enough of my life taking things that were not offered." The honesty of it landed in her chest. Ren stopped a few feet from his chair. She was trembling now, though not from cold and not from weakness. Something else moved through her. Something the bond was pouring into her. A warmth, a wanting, a pull toward this man so strong it frightened her down to the bone. And the fear was the problem. Because she knew this feeling. She had been taught what it meant. Every time she had wanted something, the world had used it against her. Every time she had reached toward warmth, the warmth had turned out to be a trap. Wanting was the leash. Wanting was the door they walked through. The body that craved was the body that could be owned. And now, her body craved him. The bond wanted her to fall into his arms and never get up. And some old, scarred, terrified part of her was screaming that this was exactly how they got you. That the gentlest cage was still a cage. That a king who waited by a door was still a king. And one day the waiting would end and the taking would begin, the way it always did. "I do not know how to do this," she said. Her voice cracked. "I do not know how to want something and not be afraid of it. Every time I have ever wanted anything, it has been used to hurt me. Food, warmth, kindness. They gave it and then they took it, and the taking was always worse because I had let myself hope." She wrapped her arms around herself. "This thing between us," she said. "This pull. My body wants to trust you. And I do not know if my body has ever once been right about who to trust." Soren rose from the chair, slowly. He did not reach for her. He stood at his full height, a head and a half taller than her, broad enough to block the firelight, and he kept his hands at his sides where she could see them. "Then I will tell you something," he said, and his deep voice was low and steady in the quiet hall. "The bond does not get to decide this," he said. "Not for you. The moon goddess herself does not get to decide this for you. I do not care what the pull says. I do not care what my wolf wants. I do not care what any law of our kind claims is owed to me." He paused. "You decide," he said. "You, no one else. Not the bond, not me. If you never want me closer than this, then this is where we stay for the rest of my life. And I will guard you just the same." Ren stared at him. No one had ever said anything like that to her. In her whole life, no one had ever told her that the choice was hers. She felt something crack inside her chest, not break, crack open, like a frozen river finally moving in the spring. The test came 2 days later, and it nearly broke them both. Maren took a turn. The princess had been holding on, kept alive by the last of the cure Soren had carried north. But the supply was nearly gone, and the rot had been waiting, patient, and now it surged. The dark veins climbed past her throat. Her breathing went shallow and ragged. The healers came to the great hall with grave faces and said the words no brother wants to hear. "There is not enough left," they said. "By morning there will be none. And without it, she will not last the week." Soren stood in the corridor outside his sister's room, And for the first time since Ren had known him, the great unshakable king looked lost, because the cure was standing right beside him. Ren saw the moment he understood it. She saw the thought arrive in his mind the same way it would have arrived in Thorn's. The solution was simple. The solution was her. A blade, a cut, a few drops of shimmering blood, and his sister would live. She watched him, and she waited to see which man he truly was. This was the test of everything. Soren turned to her. His eyes were wet. His jaw was tight. His sister was dying on the other side of that door, the only family he had left in the world, and the means to save her was right there, alive and whole, and within reach. And Ren saw him make a fist of his own hand and lower it. "No," he said. The word was rough. It cost him something terrible to say it. Ren went very still. "What?" she said. "I will not ask you," Soren said. His voice shook. "I will not ask you for your blood. Not to save her, not to save anyone. Not ever." "But your sister," Ren whispered. "She is dying. Tonight. You could ask me. You could simply ask." "That is exactly why I will not," he said. He took a breath that seemed to come up from the bottom of his soul. "Because you would say yes," he said. "You would say yes because you are good, and because you have been taught your whole life that your pain is the price the world pays to live. And if I let you bleed for my sister tonight, then I am no better than the man who held the whip. I would just be holding it more gently." He shook his head. "I would rather lose her," he said, and his voice broke on the words, "than turn you back into a thing that exists to be opened." The hall was silent. Ren could not breathe. She had spent her entire life as a resource, a well to draw from, a body whose worth was measured in what could be taken out of it. Thorn had taught her that. The whole world had agreed. Even she had come to believe it, somewhere deep down, that the only reason she was allowed to exist was the cure in her veins. And here was a man, ruined with grief, choosing to lose his sister rather than reduce her to that again. He would rather break his own heart than treat her the way the world always had. Something inside Ren that had been locked for 20 years finally let go. And she understood. It was not the bond that decided this. It was her. She crossed the space between them. She took his clenched fist in both of her small hands and slowly, gently uncurled his fingers. "I will help your sister," she said. Soren shook his head, already pulling back. "You do not have to. That is the whole point. You do not owe—" "Stop," Ren said softly, "and listen to me, because this is the part you do not understand." He went still. She looked up at him, and the silver light shimmered faintly in her eyes. "You did not ask," she said. "You refused to ask. You would have let her die to keep me free. And that is the first time in my whole life anyone has ever put me above what I could give them." Her voice was steady now. "Sure, so I am not saying yes because I am afraid. I am not saying yes because I owe you. I am not saying yes because the moon made my body want yours." She pressed his open palm flat against her own heart, where he could feel it beating. "I am saying yes because I choose to," she said, "freely, of my own will. For the first time in my life, this is mine to give, and I am giving it. Not the cure, not the blood, me." Soren looked down at her hand on his chest and her heartbeat under his palm, and the great cold king felt something in him simply come apart. He lifted his other hand, slow, asking permission with his eyes. She gave it with the smallest nod, and he laid his palm against her cheek the way he had in that golden hall, except this time she did not flinch and she did not pull away. This time she leaned into it. This time she closed her eyes and let the warmth pour through her and did not call it a trap. The bond flared between them, bright and whole. But it was not the bond that moved her now. It was the choice. He bent his head. She rose onto her toes. And in the gray light of the dying fire, they came together in a kiss that had taken every wall she owned to allow. A kiss that was not taken and not owed and not bargained for, but given freely by a woman who had finally been handed back the keys to her own body. It was soft. It was slow. It tasted of salt from the tears neither of them had noticed falling. And when they finally broke apart, Ren rested her forehead against his chest and felt his heart slamming under her cheek, and felt his arms come around her with a gentleness that made her ache. She let herself be held. For the first time, she let herself be held. "I choose this," she whispered against him. "Remember that. Whatever comes, I chose it. I will remember," Soren said into her hair. His voice was wrecked. "I will remember it every day of my life." Later, in the quiet, she went to Marin's room. She did not let anyone whip her. She did not let anyone chain her. She took a small blade from the table, and she made a single shallow cut across her own palm, by her own hand, in her own time. Her blood did not drip dull and dark the way it had in the cell. It shimmered like liquid starlight. She pressed her palm to the dying princess's lips, and she whispered, "Drink, little one." And she watched the dark veins recede and the color rush back and the ragged breathing smooth into sleep. And she understood something then that Thorn never had. The pain had never made the cure stronger. That had been his lie, told so often that in the end he believed it himself. It was the wolf's bane that had weakened it, choking her wolf until only the thinnest trickle of power could survive the poison. Free of it now, whole and unforced, her blood was not a fraction of what it had been. It was all of it. The torture had never wrung more out of her. It had only ever wasted her. She healed Marin not as a well to be drawn from, but as a woman who had decided, freely, to give. And that, Ren understood at last, was the difference between a gift and a theft. It was the only difference that had ever mattered. Soren found her there afterward, sitting at his sister's bedside in the soft light, her healed palm cradled in her lap, the silver still glowing faintly under her skin. He did not speak. He simply sat beside her, and for a long while, the king and the healer watched the sleeping princess breathe. Two people who had each, in their own way, just chosen the harder, truer thing. Outside, far beyond the walls, the storm was still coming. Garen of Blackpine was gathering his alliance. The hunt for the white healer was tightening. The hardest choices were still ahead. But inside, by the fire, for one stolen hour, there was only warmth and the quiet, unbreakable strength of a woman who had finally learned that her worth had never been in her blood at all. It had been in her all along. The warmth did not last. It never did. Ren had learned that lesson in the dark, and even now, safe behind the high stone walls of the north, some watchful part of her never fully slept. She had healed the princess. She had been held by a king. She had felt, for one stolen hour, what it was to be a person instead of a possession. And still she waited for the floor to fall out from under her. It fell at dusk. A rider came down out of the white passes, more dead than alive, clinging to a horse that buckled the moment it reached the gate. They carried him in. They pressed warm broth to his cracked lips. And when he could finally speak, the words came out broken and desperate. A pack to the south was dying. The rot had come for them. Whole families gone in a matter of days. And they had heard what the whole world now seemed to hear, that the white healer lived and breathed and walked free in the north. Take everything we own, the rider begged from his knees. Only send her, or send the cure. Send anything. Our little ones are slipping away one by one. Wren stood at the edge of the great hall and felt the weight come down on her shoulders like a familiar coat. She had thought freedom would feel light. It did not. It felt like this. Because the choice was hers now, truly hers. And a choice, she was learning, can be its own kind of chain. She did not sleep that night. She walked the cold corridors alone with a single candle, her bare feet silent on the stone, and her mind turned the problem over the way it had once turned the map of the dungeon, brick by brick, in the dark. She could heal that pack. She could heal 100 packs. She could ride out into a dying world and lay her shimmering palm against cracked lips and watch the black veins shrink back and the breathing ease and the children open their eyes. But the moment she did, she would become the thing again. A well to be drawn from, a treasure to be guarded or stolen. Every desperate alpha alive would learn that the cure had a face and a heartbeat, and they would come. And the ones who could not beg would take, and the rest of her days would be spent as the most hunted prize in the world. She had only just stopped being that. She had only just learned she was more. And here it was, laid out cold and plain. Her freedom against their lives. If she kept herself safe, strangers would die. If she gave herself to the world, she would lose the self she had clawed back out of the dark. Wren stood at the frozen window and understood, at last, the deepest cruelty Thorn had ever done to her. It was not the whip. It was this. He had taken the most generous thing in her, the healing heart of her bloodline, and twisted it into a trap. He had made her own goodness the bars of her cage. He had taught the world that a kind woman is a thing to be used up, and he had nearly taught her to believe it too. The question now was whether she would let that lie keep her caged, even after the man who built it was gone. Soren found her there as the sky turned from black to gray. He had felt her unrest through the bond, that thin, bright thread between them, and he had come. But he had learned. He did not arrive to fix her. He simply came and stood at her side, near but not touching, and let the silence hold them both. "You want to send me somewhere safe," Wren said at last. She did not look at him. "You've been turning it over for days. A hidden place, high in the peaks, walls and guards and snow. Somewhere no one could ever find me, and no one could ever take me, and I could finally just rest." Soren was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he admitted, more than once. She nodded slowly. "It is a beautiful cage," she said, so softly it was almost gentle. "The finest one anyone has ever offered me. warm, guarded, built out of love this time, instead of greed. She turned and met his eyes. But it is still a cage, Soren. The words struck him harder than any blade, because she was right, and he knew it the moment she said it. He had dressed his fear up as protection. He had told himself he only wanted her safe. But underneath, in the part of his heart he did not like to examine, there was a man who simply could not bear to lose the one good thing the moon had ever given him. A man who would wall up the most precious treasure in the world and call the wall devotion. His motive was not Thorn's motive, but a wall is a wall, and a door that only locks from the outside is the same door no matter who turns the key. You are right, Soren said. It was not an easy thing for a king to say. He was not built for it. But he looked at her in the gray light, and he chose her truth over his fear. Keeping a person, he said slowly, is not the same as loving them. I had let myself forget that. So tell me what you want, Ren. Not what I want for you. Not what the bond demands. What do you want? And she told him, I want to end it. Her voice was low and certain in a way it had never been before. Not just for me. For all of them. The packs he poisoned. The ones still dying because they cannot pay his price. And the next healer, if the moon is ever cruel enough to make another one. I want to walk back into the place where they bled me. And I want to lay the whole truth at the feet of every alpha he ever cheated. And I want to break the machine so completely that no one can ever build it again. She lifted her chin. I will not be hidden, Soren. I have spent my whole life hidden, in the dark, where no one could see what was being done to me. The dark is where they kept me small. The light is the only place I have ever felt like more than a thing. Soren looked at her, and his wolf, which for days had been clawing to drag her somewhere safe and bolt the door behind her, went still and lowered its head, because she was magnificent, not in spite of everything that had been done to her, but because of everything she had refused to let it turn her into. Then we do it your way, he said, every step, and I will stand at your side, not in front of you. This is yours, Ren, all of it. She felt something steady and warm settle in her chest. It was not the bond this time. It was respect, the one thing the world had never once offered her. He was looking at her now, not as a treasure to be locked away, but as a force to be followed. Good, she said, and the faintest edge of dry humor touched her mouth. Because there is a great deal to do, and very little time to do it. There was less time than either of them knew. The danger was already moving. The scouts brought it back in pieces over the next days, and the picture they assembled was an ugly one. The Black Pine Pack had risen. Their alpha, a cold and patient man named Garen, had spent the season whispering into the right ears, gathering the desperate and the greedy under one banner with the oldest lie there is. The healer can be shared, he told them, if you help me take her. He had built an army out of dying packs and hungry ones, out of fear and ambition both. And the heart of his alliance, the part that turned Ren's stomach when she heard it, was made of ironwood. The survivors of Thorn's ruin had not scattered into the wild to repent. They had run south to Garen, and they had brought their knowledge with them. They knew the secret. They knew the cell, the wolfsbane, the careful cruelty that wrung the cure from a healer's body. They were going to teach a new master how to do what the old one had done. When the words reached Ren, She did not flinch. She had expected them. "The world does not heal because one cruel man falls," she said quietly. "There is always another hand reaching for the whip. That is why it cannot be the man I destroy. It has to be the lie. Cut off the head and leave the lie alive, and it only grows a new one." But there was one more piece coming, and it arrived from the last direction anyone expected. Vivienne Thorne came to the northern gate alone. She was half-starved. Her fine gown had gone to rags. The jewels were long traded for crusts of bread. The proud, cruel girl who had stuck out her foot in a golden hall was gone, and in her place stood a frightened young woman who had built her entire self on her father's power and had nothing at all now that it had crumbled. She had run from Garen's camp, where the Ironwood survivors had taken her in and then begun to circle her the way wolves circle the weakest of the pack. So she had come to the one place in the world that had every reason to want her dead. They brought her before Ren. The two women faced each other across the long stone hall, the one who had laughed at suffering and the one who had endured it. Ren felt no triumph, only a strange, tired clarity. "Why are you here?" she said. Vivienne's chin trembled. "Because they are coming for you," she whispered. "Garen, my father's people, the ones who know how you were kept. They mean to take you alive. They have a plan to pull the king away from these walls, to thin his guard, to strike when you are out in the open." She drew a shaking breath. "I heard all of it," she said. "Every part. I will tell you. Not because I am good. I know what I am. But if I help you, perhaps you will not let them hang me when it is done." A low murmur ran through the hall. Soren's hand drifted toward the hilt at his side. The guards along the walls went tense. Ren lifted one hand, and the room fell silent. She studied Vivienne for a long, slow moment. She thought of the foot in her path, the shriek of worthless thing, the years of small daily cruelties from a girl who had never once known hunger. And then she thought of something harder. That cruelty is a cage, too. That this girl had been raised by a monster to be a smaller monster and had never once been shown there was another way to live. It did not excuse her, but it explained her. "You will tell us everything," Ren said, "and no, I will not let them hang you." Vivienne's eyes flooded. "But you will not walk free either," Ren went on, and her voice was iron now. "You will answer for what you did, with work, with honesty, with a life spent building something better than the wreck your father left behind. That is not mercy, because you earned it. It is mercy because I refuse to become a woman who only knows how to punish." She paused. "The cycle ends with me," she said. "The whip, the cage, the blood for gold, the vengeance too. All of it ends here, in this hall, tonight." And in that moment, even Soren, who loved her already for her strength, saw something new rise in her. Not just strength, wisdom. The kind that is only ever bought with suffering, and only ever carried by the rare few who refuse to let the suffering have the last word. The preparation began in earnest, and Ren did not sit above it. She stood at the center of it. She did not wait in a tower while men bent over maps. She drew the maps herself, the dungeon she had memorized stone by stone over all those silent years, the tunnels, the hidden doors, the blind corners where the guards never thought to look. She named the convoy routes. She knew, from a lifetime of listening through a wall, exactly where the proof of Thorn's poison trade would still be hidden away, and she reached out to the valley, to the humans she had bled for years to protect, who had never once known her name. She sent riders to carry them the truth at last, and to offer them, for the first time in their lives, a choice in their own fate, and the shield of the North at their backs. And the valley, which had lived so long beneath the shadow of slaughter, began quietly to stir. Soren watched her work. He had led armies. He had taken the savage North by storm, and he stood at the edge of the war room and watched a woman who had spent her whole life in a cage outthink every seasoned commander he owned. "She is going to win this," Maren said softly, coming to stand at her brother's shoulder. "I know," Soren said. "And she is going to win it as herself," the princess said. "Not as your queen, not as the cure, as Ren." Soren looked across the room at the woman bent over the maps, the silver glowing faint beneath her skin, the clear, hard light burning in her eyes. "Yes," he said. And the Winter Reaver, who had spent his whole life needing to stand in front, found that he was finally deeply content to stand beside. Outside the walls, the snow began to fall harder. The storm was nearly here, and for the first time in all her life, Wren Halliwell was not crouched in the dark, waiting for it to break over her. She was walking out to meet it, on her own 2 feet, in the full light, her voice ready, her truth in hand. The girl they had kept in the cell was gone for good. What stood in her place was something that world of cruel and hungry men had never once thought to fear. A gentle woman who had finally decided to save herself first, so that she could choose, freely, who else to save. The gathering was Wren's idea. She did not march on Garen. She did not let the war come to the gates of the North and break on the snow. She knew that a battle decided by swords would only crown a new owner for the cure, that whoever won the field would simply inherit the lie. So she did something the men around her had not thought to do. She called for the truth to be heard. Word went out to every pack within reach, to the dying and the desperate, to the proud and the greedy, to all the alphas who had ever pressed gold into Thorn's hand and called the shimmering vial a miracle. "Come," the message said. "Come to the old neutral ground beneath the broken tower, where pack law has always held that no blade may be drawn. Come and hear the white healer speak. Come and learn what you have truly been buying all these years." Soren had not liked it. He had wanted to ride out with 200 wolves and end Garen in the field. But Wren had looked at him across the war table and said quietly, "If you win it with steel, then steel is what rules the cure forever. Let me win it with the truth, and the truth will outlast us both." And the Winter Reaver, who had spent his whole life winning things with steel, had bowed his head and let her lead. Garen took the bait, exactly as Vivienne had said he would. He could not resist it. A gathering of every alpha worth taking from, the white healer standing in the open, the northern king lured away from his walls. To a man like Garen, it did not look like a summit. It looked like a feast laid out for the taking. His whole plan had hinged on one thing: pulling the Winter Reaver away from the gathering, thinning the guard, striking while the healer stood alone and unprotected in the open. But Vivienne had spoken first, and so the false rider Garen sent north, The one meant to draw the king home with word of an attack on his keep met only an empty road and a closed gate and snow that swallowed his tracks. The king never left her side. Garin did not know that yet. He still believed the trap was his. He came with his alliance at his back, the dying packs he had bought with promises, the hungry ones he had bought with fear. And there, among them, walking free, were the survivors of Ironwood. And at the heart of them, his arm still bound and crooked from where Sorin had shattered it, was Cassius Thorn. He had not repented. Men like Thorn do not repent. They only look for a new master to serve, and a new way to climb. He had crawled to Garin on his ruined arm and offered the one thing he still owned, his knowledge. The recipe of poison and pain that turned a healer into a well. He thought it would save him. He did not understand that he had walked straight into the one place his whole empire of lies could finally be brought down. The neutral ground lay in the shadow of a broken tower, a ring of ancient stone open to the gray sky, where the old law of the packs forbade the drawing of any weapon. Ren walked into the center of it alone. That had been her choice too. Sorin stood at the edge with his wolves, every muscle in his body screaming to move closer, and he held himself still because she had asked him to, because this was hers, because the whole meaning of it would shatter if she walked in surrounded by a king's swords. So she walked in alone, small, unarmed, the silver glowing faint beneath her skin in the cold light. And the assembled alphas of half the world fell silent and stared at the bedtime story made flesh. For a moment, the old fear rose in her, the ring of staring faces, the men twice her size, the smell of so many wolves, so much hunger, so much want. Some ancient trained part of her wanted to make herself small, to drop her eyes, to disappear. She did not. She had spent her whole life being looked at as a thing. She lifted her chin and looked back. "You all know the cure," Ren said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The broken stone caught it and carried it, and the silence drank it down. You have paid for it in gold and land and oaths. You have spooned it into the mouths of your dying. You have called it a miracle from the deep woods of Ironwood, brewed from rare herbs by master healers. She let the words settle. There were no herbs, she said. There were no master healers. There was never any miracle. She turned slowly, meeting eye after eye around the ring. There was only me. A murmur moved through the crowd, low and uneasy. Every vial you ever bought, she said, was my blood, taken from my body, whipped out of me at dawn, every dawn, for years, in a cell beneath the floors where you feasted. They poisoned me so my wolf could not rise. They beat me so the fear would make the blood run strong. And they sold what they tore out of me to you, at any price you would pay. The silence had changed now. It had weight. Across the ring, Thorn's face had gone the color of ash. "She is lying," he called out, his voice cracking. "She is a freak, a traitor's daughter. Do not listen to—" "But that is not the worst of it," Ren said, and she did not even raise her voice. And somehow that buried him completely. "The worst of it is this." She turned to the dying packs, the ones with grief carved into their faces, the ones who had buried whole families to the rot. "You think the sickness found you by chance," she said. "It did not. The man who sold you the cure is the same man who sent you the disease." A sound went through the crowd, a sharp, collective intake of breath. His convoys did not only carry vials out, Ren said. They carried the rot in. Tainted goods, blankets soaked in the blood of the sick, sent quietly into the packs that still had wealth left to bleed. The sickness would bloom a few weeks after his caravans passed through, and then his riders would arrive, so generous, so concerned, offering the only cure in the world, at double the price. She let it land. He made the disease, she said. He sold the cure. He grew fat on both ends, and your dead are the price he paid for his gold. The ring of alphas erupted, not into violence, not yet, into a roar of fury and grief and dawning horror, as half the gathered packs turned as one toward Cassius Thorne, and the survivors of Ironwood huddled around him. Because Ren had not brought only words. She had brought proof, the ledgers she had remembered, the convoy routes she had named, and the witnesses, the men of Ironwood that Vivian had marked, who saw the tide turning and began to break, one after another, confessing to save their own skins, naming the routes, the dates, the blankets, the lie. The truth came out of the dark at last, and it could not be put back. Garen saw his alliance dissolving in front of him. The packs he had bought with promises were turning. The dying ones wanted Thorne's blood, not the healer's chains. His grand plan to seize the cure and rule the world that needed it was crumbling into a riot of grief and rage. So Garen did the only thing men like him ever know how to do. He reached for force. "Take her!" he roared, drawing his blade in the one place on earth where no blade was meant to be drawn. The old law be damned. Take the healer. With her in hand, none of this matters. With her in hand, we own the world. And the trap that Vivian had warned of finally sprang. Garen's chosen wolves broke from the crowd and lunged for Ren. But Ren had known. She had known for days. The northern wolves, hidden among the gathered packs in plain clothes, scattered through the crowd exactly where they were needed, rose up in the same instant. Steel answered steel. The neutral ground shattered into chaos. And through it all, Ren stood at the center and did not run. Soren moved like a storm let off its leash. He had held himself at the edge through every word, every revelation, his whole body a drawn bow. And the moment Garen's blade cleared its sheath, he was already crossing the ground. He did not go for Garen. He went for her. He put himself between Ren and the lunging wolves, and the Winter Reaver became, for a few terrible breaths, the thing the North whispered about in the dark. He was everywhere she was not guarded. He broke the first wolf's charge with his shoulder. He caught the second by the arm and turned its own momentum into the ground. He did not need a blade. He never had. But he did not fight to win the field. He fought to hold the space around her, because this was still hers, and his only task, the only one that mattered, was to make sure the world could not take her before she finished. And then Garrick came, the great scarred enforcer, the one who had dragged Ren by her hair every dawn, the one who had held the basin to catch her blood, who had chained her wrists to the iron ring, who had watched her bleed for years and felt nothing. He came through the chaos with a heavy blade and a look of pure hate, and he came not for the king. He came for her. "You," he snarled, "you did this, you little—" He never finished. Soren reached him first. The king caught the enforcer's blade arm in one massive hand, and the two of them strained against each other, the scarred torturer and the winter reaver, while the battle raged around them. And Soren could have ended it. He had ended men for far less. He could have crushed the throat that had given the orders, snapped the arm that had held the basin, paid back every drop of her blood in kind. For every dawn you took from her, the king growled, his eyes burning gold, his grip tightening. But then a hand touched his arm. Ren. She had crossed to him through the chaos. She stood at his side, the silver bright beneath her skin, her dark eyes fixed on the man who had tortured her for years. No, she said. Soren went still. Garrick laughed, an ugly, broken sound, even with the king's hand crushing his arm. Going to beg for mercy now, healer? After everything? Ren looked at him. She looked at the scars on his knuckles and the cruelty in his face, and she felt the whole black weight of every dawn she had survived rise up inside her like a tide. She could have it, right now. She could nod, and the king would end him, and the man who had hurt her more than any other would simply cease to be. It would be justice. No one in the world would have called it wrong, and some deep, wounded part of her wanted it so badly she could taste it. But she had made a promise. The cycle ends with me. I am not going to kill you, Ren said quietly. Garrick blinked. And it is not because you deserve to live, she said. You do not. You will spend the rest of your years answering for every morning you dragged me into that room. You will be judged by the packs you helped poison. You will dig in the cold for what you took, and you will live a long time thinking about it. She leaned close. But you do not get to make me into you, she said. That was the last thing you could have taken from me. The part that still knows the difference between justice and slaughter. And I am keeping it. She straightened and looked at Soren. Bind him, she said. He answers to the law, not to my grief. And the king, who had killed men for half of what Garrick had done, looked at the woman beside him with something close to awe, and lowered the enforcer to his knees, and bound him, and let him live. The battle was already turning. With the truth out and the alliance shattered, Garen's wolves had no cause left to die for. The dying packs had turned against him. The hungry ones saw no profit in a losing fight. One by one they laid down their blades, and Garen, the cold patient man who had dreamed of owning the world, found himself standing nearly alone. He tried to run. He did not get far. The northern wolves took him at the edge of the broken ground, and they brought him back, and they set him down in the dirt beside Thorn and Garrick and the survivors of Ironwood. The whole rotten heart of the lie gathered in one place at last. And it was Ren who stood before them. Not Soren, not a king, not an army. A woman in a simple gown with the silver glowing under her skin, who had walked into that ring alone and broken an empire with nothing but the truth she had carried out of the dark. Thorn looked up at her from the ground, his ruined arm cradled to his chest. And for the first time in all the years she had known him, there was no contempt left in his face. There was only fear. You should have died in that cell, he spat. A broken little Omega, a freak with no wolf. You were nothing. Ren looked down at him, and she did not flinch. You spent years telling me what I was, she said. A thing. A well. A price the world paid to live. You poisoned me so I could never see anything else. You whipped me so the fear would make me useful. You threatened a whole valley of innocence so I would stay in chains and call it choice. She crouched down so they were eye to eye. But you made one mistake, she said softly. You told me I was nothing, over and over, for so long, that you forgot to notice I was listening. I heard everything. I remembered everything. And the nothing you kept in the dark just walked into the light and took it all apart. She rose. You will not be killed, she said. To all of them. None of you. Death is too quick, and I am done feeding the cycle that made you. You will be stripped of everything. Your names, your packs, your gold, and you will be sent to the coal mines in the far north to dig in the dark for the rest of your days. She paused. You spent your lives putting others in chains, she said. Now you will learn the weight of them. If you survive the winter, you will have earned your bread. No one argued. The gathered alphas, the ones Thorn had cheated and poisoned, would not have allowed it any other way. And as the northern wolves dragged the architects of the lie away into the snow, Ren turned at last to the dying packs, the grieving ones, the ones who had buried families and come here with nothing but desperate hope. She raised her healed palm, the one she had cut by her own hand for the princess. There is no miracle herb, she said, but there is a cure, and it was never meant to be sold. From this day, no one will ever pay in gold or land or blood for what should always have been freely given. She looked out at the broken, hopeful faces. The dark is over, she said. All of it. We heal in the light now, together. And somewhere above the broken tower, the gray clouds thinned, and a single shaft of pale sun came down through the cold, and fell on the woman who had once been kept in a cell where no light ever reached. Soren came to stand beside her, not in front, beside. He looked at her, at the silver in her skin, and the fierce, gentle strength in her face, and he understood that he was not looking at someone he had saved. He was looking at someone who had saved herself, and had decided freely, with her own two hands, to save the rest of the world too. The world did not change in a single dawn. Those who tell the story sometimes pretend it did. They like the clean version. The lie falls, the queen rises, and everyone lives gently ever after. But that is not how it happened. The lie had stood for so long that it had grown deep roots, and roots do not die because you want them to. They die slowly. They die the way ice melts off a mountain, one cold drop at a time, until one morning you look up and the white is simply gone. That is how the truth spread. Slowly, quietly, drop by drop. There were packs that would not believe it at first. There were proud old alphas who had built their whole power on Thorn's shimmering vials, and they did not want to hear that the miracle they had paid for in gold had been wrung out of a woman in the dark. To believe Ren was to admit they had been part of something monstrous. So some of them looked away. Some of them clung to the old story the way a drowning man clings to a stone. But the truth has a patience that no lie has ever had. It does not need to shout. It only needs to keep being true. The witnesses talked. The freed people of the valley carried the story from territory to territory, over the passes, through the long nights, into every hall that would open its doors. And the dying packs that Ren healed went home and told what they had seen with their own eyes. the shimmering blood, the gentle hand, the woman who asked for nothing at all. One by one, the roots of the old lie loosened and let go. Wren did not rest while it happened. She could not have rested if she had wanted to. Rest was still a thing her body did not quite know how to do. Some nights she would wake in the soft, warm bed and reach for the cold stone wall out of habit and find only blankets and lie awake a long time learning again that the dark was over. There were too many dying, and now, for the first time in her life, she could reach them. So she rode out, not in a wagon with the curtains drawn, not as a secret moved under armed guard. She rode out into the open with the silver glowing soft beneath her skin, and she went to the packs the rot had hollowed, the ones where the children had stopped playing and the old ones had stopped rising, and she laid her hand on them, and she healed them. But she healed them her own way. That was the line she would not cross, no matter who begged, no matter how small the child, no matter how loud the grief. She did not let anyone bleed her. She did not let anyone take. When she gave the cure, she gave it by her own hand, a single shallow cut on her own palm, in her own time, by her own will. And when a sickness had broken and the worst had passed, she stopped and she rested, and not one desperate alpha on this earth was permitted to demand a single drop more than she chose to give. At first they did not understand it. How could they? They had known only the old way, the vial, the price, the taking. The idea that the cure was a thing to be bought and owned and squeezed out of its source had soaked so deep into the world that some of them could not imagine any other shape for it. Some of them tried to push. There was a hard, proud alpha in the early days whose only son was fading fast. He could not grasp why the healer would not simply open a vein and pour. The boy was slipping. The cure was right there, walking around in front of him on two legs. What was a little more blood to a creature who made the stuff in her body? He reached for her arm to take what he needed. He did not get far. Wren caught his wrist before Soren could even move, and she held it, and the silver flared bright and cold under her skin. And the great proud alpha discovered to his shock that the small woman in front of him was far stronger than she looked. "I will heal your son," she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was iron underneath it. "I want to heal your son, but you will not take what I have not offered. Not from me. Not ever again. That is the whole reason any of you are still alive to stand here and ask." She let go of his wrist. "The cure is not a thing that is taken," she said, loud enough now for the gathered pack to hear. "It is a thing that is given. The day the world forgets that difference is the day the cure vanishes from the earth. Because I decide. Me, no one else. That is how it heals now. Or it does not heal at all." The alpha stared at her for a long moment, and then the hard, proud man bowed his head to a woman who had spent her whole life being told she was nothing. And she healed his son. That was how it began. Not with a decree carved in stone, not with an army at her back, but with one woman, over and over, in hall after hall, teaching a world built entirely on taking how to simply receive a gift. It was slow work. It was the slowest, hardest work she had ever done. Harder than surviving the cell, in some ways, because surviving had only asked her to endure. This asked her to build, to stand in front of grief and fear and old greed day after day, and refuse to be made into a thing again, and refuse, just as firmly, to become cruel in return. But it was hers. Every bit of it was hers. Soren watched her do it, and something in him kept breaking open in the most unexpected way. He had loved her first for her strength, that fierce, stubborn flame that had refused to die in the dark. Then he had loved her for her wisdom, the clear, hard mind that had broken an empire with the truth. Now he loved her for this, for the patient, unglamorous, endless work of remaking a broken world, one bowed head at a time. She never raised her hand in cruelty. She never once became the thing that had been done to her. She just kept choosing, over and over, the harder and truer way. He had spent his entire life believing the world understood only force. He had taken the savage north by it. He had ruled by it. They had called him the Reaver and the Butcher, and he had worn the names like armor because armor was all he thought a man could trust. And now he watched a woman conquer more of the world than he ever had, with a cut palm and a flat refusal to be owned. And he learned from her. That was the part the old stories never expected. The Winter Reaver learning gentleness from a girl who had been kept in a cell. But he did. He began to settle disputes with words before he reached for steel. He began to ask before he commanded. He gave his sister Maren a real voice in the running of the North, and he listened to it, even when it disagreed with him. Ren had not only healed bodies, she had begun, slowly, without ever meaning to heal him too. She drew the cold out of a man everyone had given up on, the same way the northern healers had once drawn the poison out of her, a little at a time, until the warmth could finally reach the places that had been frozen for years. The crowning came after the worst of the dying was over. It was not Soren's idea, though he would have laid his whole kingdom at her feet and called it a small thing. It came from the packs themselves, from the ones she had healed, from the valley people she had bled for in the dark, from the dozens of territories that had learned the hard and bitter way, exactly what she truly was. They wanted her named, not as the cure, not as the king's mate, not as a treasure the North happened to own, as herself. They gathered under an open sky on ground that had once been called neutral and had since become something better. A place where the old lie had died and a new thing had been born in its place. And the alphas of the surviving packs, the proud and the humbled both, came to give her a name with their own mouths. The White Queen, not a queen of the North alone, a queen of the healing, a sovereign over the cure itself, the one whose word alone decided how it would be given, so that no man could ever again build an empire out of another soul's pain. Ren stood before them all, and for a long moment she could not find any words. She thought of the cell. She thought of the cold that came up through the stone and never left, the rotting straw, the dawn that always arrived too soon. She thought of the girl who had counted strangers' faces to survive the whip, who had built a map of the dark in her own mind because some stubborn ember in her had refused to go out. That girl had never once imagined this. That girl had only ever dared to hope she might last one more morning. And here she stood now, in the full open light, being crowned by the very world that had once kept her where no light could reach. She did not weep. She had wept enough in her years. This was not a moment for tears. This was a moment to be witnessed. She lifted her chin, and she looked out at them, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried clear and steady across the open ground. There was a girl, she said, who was told her whole life that she was worth only what could be taken out of her. The crowd fell utterly silent. She was told her pain was the price the world paid to keep breathing. She was told her blood belonged to whoever was strong enough to hold the whip. She was told in the dark, over and over, year after year, that she was nothing but a thing. She paused. And the cruelest part, Wren said softly, was that for a long while, she almost believed it. She let those words settle into every chest in the crowd. So hear me now, she said, because this is the only law I will ever lay down as your queen. No person is a thing. No one's worth is measured by what can be taken from them. Not the healer, not the Omega, not the smallest, quietest, most overlooked soul in any pack any of you will ever rule. The day you forget that is the day you become the men we sent to the cold mines. She looked across the ring of faces, hard alphas and grieving mothers and wide-eyed children. Be better than the world that made me, she said. That is all I ask of you. See people, truly see them, not for what they can give you, for who they are when they have nothing to give at all. And the gathered packs, the proud and the broken, the powerful and the small, bowed their heads to the woman who had risen out of a cell to teach them the oldest lesson there is. That dignity is not earned. It is owed to everyone, always. That night, in the quiet of the keep, Soren found her at the window where they had first spoken honestly to each other, looking out at the falling snow. He came and stood at her side, beside her, the way he always stood now, never in front. She wore no crown. She had set it aside the instant the ceremony ended. She had never wanted the gold of the thing. She had wanted only what it meant. You did it, he said softly. Wren shook her head. We have only begun, she said. There will be other hard men, other lies. The world does not stay healed simply because it was healed once. It has to be chosen over and over every single day by everyone living in it. She turned to him, and a small, real smile touched the corner of her mouth. But yes, she said, we made a beginning. He reached out, slow, the way he always did, asking with his eyes and nothing else. She answered with the smallest nod, and he turned her gently by the shoulder so the firelight fell across her back, and he looked at the scars there. They had not vanished. Her own blood had closed the deepest of them, the fresh wounds, the torn flesh, the open ruin of that last morning at Ironwood. But the silver ridges remained, mapped in long pale lines across her skin, a record of every dawn she had endured. The healers had offered more than once to try to fade them. They had salves and powders. They could make her smooth again, unmarked, as if none of it had ever happened. Wren had refused every time. Soren laid his hand against her back, light as falling snow, and traced one of the silver lines with the gentlest touch. You could let them go, he said quietly. You have the power to do it. You could be unmarked. I know, Wren said. Then why keep them? She was quiet a moment, looking out at the snow. Because they were never his, she said at last. That is what they tried to make them. His marks. His proof of what he could do to a person. For a long time, I thought of them that way too, as something he had put on me. Something that belonged to him. She turned and looked up at Soren, and the firelight caught the silver in her eyes. But they were never his, she said. They are mine. Every single one. Every line is a morning I lived through when he wanted me to break. Every scar is a day the ember did not go out. They are not a record of what was done to me. She lifted her own hand and laid it over his, where it rested against her back. They are a record of what I survived, she said, and I will not be ashamed of even one of them. Soren looked at her for a long, long moment. This woman who had been kept in the dark and who had chosen, again and again, the harder and braver thing. And the great cold king, the reaver, the butcher, the terror whispered about in 100 halls, lowered his head and pressed his lips, soft as a vow, against the silver scars on her back. Not to heal them, to honor them. What grew between them after that was not the wild flare of the bond. The bond was still there. It always would be, bright and warm, the thread that had run between them since the wind first shifted in a golden hall full of strangers. But it had become the smallest part of what they were. What grew between them was chosen, built slowly, earned, day by patient day. He learned the exact shape of her old fears, and he never once used them to move her where he wanted. She learned that his stillness was not the held breath before cruelty, the way every other man's stillness had been her whole life, but only the deep quiet of a man finally at rest. He learned to ask. She learned to want without flinching from the wanting. He learned to follow. She learned to lead. And in the long nights, when the fires burned low and the snow whispered against the glass, they came together the way two people come together who have each decided, freely and fully, with their whole hearts, that there is no one else in all the world they would rather stand beside. It was not the moon's doing. It was not the bond's pull, dragging them where they had no say. It was theirs, and that, Ren had come to understand, was the only kind of love that had ever been worth anything at all. The kind you choose. The kind no one hands you and no one can take. Maren grew strong and whole, and she took up a true place at her brother's side, and the North was the better for her voice in its councils. She and Ren became something neither had expected, not quite sisters, something all their own. Two women who had each looked death in the face from opposite sides of the same cruel lie, and walked away from it, changed. The valley people, freed at last from the shadow that had hung over them so long, did not simply scatter to the winds. Many of them stayed. They built a real life under the banner of the North, no longer pawns to be threatened in someone else's game, but people with names and choices and a future of their own. They never forgot what Ren had done. The years she had bled in the dark to keep them breathing, when she had not even known a single one of their faces. They told their children the story, but not as a tale of a king who rescued a girl, as a tale of a girl who saved them all, and then walked out into a dying world and saved that too. And Vivian, even Vivian, she did not become good overnight. People almost never do. But Ren kept her word. She was not hanged. She was not set free either. She was given work, real work, in the healer's wing, tending the very kind of suffering she had once curled her lip at in a golden hall. At first she was clumsy and bitter and resentful of every hour of it. But there is something about holding a dying child's hand through the long dark of a fever that changes a person. There is something about being trusted after you have done nothing on this earth to deserve it, that quietly calls a person to become someone worthy of the trust. Slowly, over a very long time, the cruel girl who had stuck out her foot to humiliate a broken Omega became something else. Not a saint, nothing so grand, just a person who was trying. And one day, long after, she came to Ren with tears standing in her eyes, and she asked the question that had haunted her. Why? Why mercy? Why a second chance after everything she had done and everything she had been? Because no one ever gave you a first one, Ren said. Vivienne went still. You were raised by a monster to be a smaller monster, Ren said gently. That does not undo what you did. The people you hurt were still hurt. But it means you were never once shown that another way was even possible. So I showed you. I gave you the choice no one ever gave you. What you do with it from here, that part has always been yours. Vivienne wept then, truly wept, in a way the proud jeweled girl never could have. And after that, she did better. The old wolves still tell the story when the fires burn low and the snow piles against the doors. The story of a girl whose scars once kept a whole kingdom breathing. But that is not where the story ends. The story ends in the light. It ends with a queen who never hid her scars, and a world that finally learned to look at the quiet ones twice. The old wolves do not explain the lesson anymore. They have stopped needing to. They simply say her name, and the children understand. And that is the end of it. The tale of Ren Hallowell, the girl from the cell, the White Queen of the Healing, the one who learned to save herself first, and then, with open and willing hands, chose to save everyone else.